My name is Beth Hayes. I work in Pueblo County. I'm the Agriculture, Natural Resource, and Small Acreage Specialist over there. I do sit on the National Grasshopper Board on behalf of the United States, and then I run the Grasshopper program for the entire state on behalf of CSU. So I am like the Grasshopper officio, if you will, on behalf of CSU. I didn't choose it, the Grasshoppers chose me. But what's nice is that you guys get a lot of extra attention because I'm right next door to you. So when they start doing survey counts, I might ask a lot of you to let me know what levels you're seeing, what species. I need pictures and I need threshold counts. So we're going to talk about all that. You'll get a lot of good information tonight. I did just bring a handout that has a lot of QR codes on it. We'll go over what's on here, how do you access all of it. There's a lot of information in this document, and we'll have time for questions. So please don't feel intimidated because it's a lot of information. I'm going to throw a lot at you, but you are welcome to ask questions at any point throughout this presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. Okay? So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. I might have to block. No, there we go. All right, if this is your first ever extension class, you'll get really familiar with this slide. This is our non-discriminatory and equal opportunity provider slide that extension provides at all times. The land acknowledgement that it mentions on this slide is about the land that is in Fort Collins, where the main university is. It has nothing to do with the rest of the state. If you would like to learn more, you can always just Google it. We just always have to put that out. All right. So this is a little bit about me, and then the topics we're going to cover tonight. And like I said, I've been doing this for about 6 years now. I'm right next door to you guys. I did a lot of survey counts in your area last year. I work really closely with the Abbey Winery as well. So I have a lot of ag experience, both professional and education-wise, and it comes really in handy when we have infestation levels like what we saw last year. So, all right, so. This is last year's map. So every year, the USDA APHIS, which is the ones that oversee pests across the United States, put out what they call a hazard map. The darker the color is, the worse the numbers are. So the really dark red areas, like if you look at Montana, horrible, right? That's over 50 to 60 grasshoppers every square yard. Okay? Yeah. So that's what that red color means. As you can see, the circle I drew on Colorado, that's where you guys are and that's where Pueblo is. So you can understand why we saw the numbers we did last year, because we had an infestation level. I mean, it was ridiculously high. And we'll talk about why. And then of course they got really hit hard in the northeastern corner of our state, over by like Sterling and Nunn and places like that. They really had high numbers, a lot like what we saw here. So this year, you can see again the map, that's our general area there. We're looking a little better, we're in the orange, we're not in the red, but unfortunately the bright red spot right in the middle, that's Pueblo. So don't think you guys aren't gonna get it because they fly, right? They migrate. So just know that we got a little lucky with the winter weather we saw coming through, so that will impact these numbers, but we are starting to warm up as a state. Spring is on its way, and with the hazard map predictions, we're still looking at really high numbers for this year. So just be prepared for that. I know, I don't have a lot of good news, but we'll get going. Yes?
How cold does it have to be to kill the eggs?
So her question is, how cold does it have to be to kill the egg? So it does have to get below 0, and it has to stay that way for a minimum of 6 hours. And it's really better if it stays that way for 4 to 5 days. So that is the biggest problem. When we get snow, it hibernates, it covers them. So snow actually acts like an insulator, and it doesn't kill them. So if it gets really cold and we get a lot of snow, we don't actually lose that many egg counts, unfortunately. We need just the cold and the wind. That's what we need. We don't need a lot of snow. And when we talk about grasshoppers, so that's the big piece of that. And then what the USDA does is, so every year they do counts, and they do them county by county, and then they do a whole state one. So nymphs are immature grasshoppers that cannot fly. They don't have wings yet. So they do a nymph immature stage, and then they do an adult count to kind of see where hatchings are at and how bad the populations are expected to be throughout different parts of the season. In 2024, unfortunately, they didn't have any staff for your area, so you guys didn't get in the count. But I know for a fact, because I was here, I did your counts. Yes. I gave them numbers. They didn't input the data, but I told them you guys had high infestation levels. So even though you're not marked on the map in red, I know your county was red. So I brought that up at the National Grasshopper meeting, and they're going to try to update the 2024 map. So we know you guys are red. Pueblo was red. Custer was red, and a lot more of Huerfano was red, because the biggest problem is the main surveyors from the USDA, they can only go on public land unless they have permission. They can't go on private property. So that's where it gets really tough, and that's why a lot of the times the maps aren't accurate of what you guys are seeing because they don't have access. So when they start doing counts and we start sending stuff out through extension, I really encourage you to say, yes, you can come on my property. Yes, I will let you do counts. Please let us do that because we're trying to partner with the people who can make these maps and then get you guys funding to do something about it. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you, am I going to get something in the mail and I say, yes, please? 'Cause
Yes.
I felt like the grasshoppers in my backyard ate everything. They were even eating the findings of the spruce trees.
Yeah, they were very destructive.
But I have a better one, is they were eating the flowers and the leaves on the wreath artificial on my door.
So for those of you that couldn't hear, we had them eating pine trees and eating artificial wreaths because they were that hungry, which yes, they were eating literally anything that could fit in their mouth. They don't really discriminate on what they're eating. So yes, and his other question was, will I get something in the mail? How do I find out about this? We are doing a bigger outreach program through Extension this year. I've kind of taken that on behalf of the university, and I will send this out statewide to my colleagues like Kelsey and Reggie Foster if you're from Custer County, and ask them to send it out to you all through your Master Gardener list, through their newsletters, through Facebook, and say, if you have high numbers, I need your contact info. I need to know where you're at. I need to know how many acres you have, what are they eating, and I need pictures because I need to know what species you are seeing. So I will start to do some early counts so that we can start to see when they're starting to hatch. There's some info in that, in this, and so you'll start seeing that probably in the next month or so. I will start asking you guys, if you start seeing stuff, start reporting it because they don't start doing any field counts until May. We're going to try to get ahead of that curve because by the time May rolls around, it's too late. We're already way behind the curve. So we're going to start doing it a lot earlier. So this is 2024, but this is the adult survey. So again, darker the color, the worse we are. So a lot of the red spots you can see are bad. But you guys did get an adult count, which is nice. So you can see you had a lot of red spots of adults, which means you also had red spots of nymphs because you can't have adults if you don't have immatures, right? So that's that one. And then Fremont County wise, so why did you guys have such high infestation levels? So there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're kind of going to get into that in the next couple slides. But what I really want you to see is that you guys warmed up really fast last year. You warmed up really fast, like in February, and then your plant life started kicking up really early. And then we had a really mild winter the year before. So we kind of created this perfect storm of what creates grasshopper infestation years from a climate perspective, from a plant perspective, and then they changed a lot. They came out of higher elevation and they came down the mountainside as well. So we had new influx of species that aren't from this area that came off the mountains that came down to you guys, and that's what we have been seeing, which is kind of crazy. So this is the Colorado Drought Monitor. So this one here on my side, this is the March 5th of 2024, and the circled one is your county, and then you can see this year of March 6th of 2025 when I pulled that screenshot. Again, the darker the color, the more drought you have. So technically, by the Drought Monitor standards, you guys were a little less drought last year, but just because it said you're in the white, it doesn't mean you're not dry. It's just not extreme. That's all that means. So, and it doesn't account for how warm you guys were getting this time last year. So, because your snowpack was starting to melt. So, 2023 maps. So, this is your 2023, because I kind of wanted to go back a little bit. So, this is your NIP survey for Fremont County. So, they gave you guys low numbers. So, the blues are 1 to 2 every square yard. You have the yellows, which are 8 to 14, and then the greens that you see are 3 to 7 for every square yard of individuals. So, as you can see, they didn't go a lot of places in your county, even in 2023. They really only went 4 or 5 places, 6 on this map. So again, I encourage you, please respond when you see stuff from Extension asking you for information. It's not because we're trying to do anything on behalf of the government. It's just we have to be able to control these insects, and we'll talk about all the fun things that come along when we don't handle it. So 2023, this is your adults. You can see that they did a few more counts, and then you got your little red spot, right? And that's really high infestation. For Colorado, that's 15 plus individuals for every square yard. But it makes sense that if that was a hot spot, everywhere else around it most likely was as well, because grasshoppers don't stay in one spot, they do spread out. So that kind of tells you what that looked like for 2023. In 2024, you guys didn't get a NIP survey like we saw on the map. So this is the only one we have for 2024. This is the adult one. Again, they got a few more sites in. They were able to get some more red counts in there, unfortunately, but they missed so much of your county, and they didn't capture that data, which then when they show this to the higher ups, then the higher ups look at this and be like, oh, Fremont County doesn't need any money for bugs. There wasn't any bugs by the map, right? And then there's people like me who go, no. I have videos and I have pictures and I have survey counts. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, yeah. So don't look at just the map. So climate impacts. So when we talk about grasshoppers, the biggest climate impact is temperature. That is the biggest one that impacts their infestation levels. The drier we are and the milder our winters are, the higher infestation levels we're going to see. So anytime, like we saw, we were in a really bad drought period for a long time, we just kind of made a perfect storm for them, unfortunately. And we saw a lot of them moving across different parts of the United States, moving into Colorado, and unfortunately it was just perfect timing for them. So when we have a hot spring, they hatch early and they have fast development. When we have a colder spring, they hatch slower and later in the year. So springtime is a really big factor, that when we start hitting 60 degrees and above, like this whole week, I can tell you some of them are hatching right now, as we speak. Yes, because we have been sitting at over 60 degrees for most of the day, right? We're gonna cool down a little bit on Friday, but not enough, because we're gonna go right back up in temperature. So we're looking at hatching starting as of Monday. So that is a big thing. Like we talked about, snow cover creates insulation, so it helps them with hibernation, helps those eggs last throughout the winter. We had more hard freeze days early this year, so that actually worked in our favor. We got really cold and we stayed cold, so that should impact those numbers, so you will see less hatchings. Doesn't mean that it will be not really like what we saw last year, it's just going to be a little less. So don't think that you will see any grasshoppers, you will still see a lot, and you're still going to have to do some management strategies. Drought does impact them, but it has to be extremely long. We're talking like 8 to 10 plus years that will impact them. That will eventually impact their egg development, because it's a genetic pass on. So even if we get into another drought season this year, it's not going to affect the grasshoppers that hatch out this year. It's a multi-generational impact. So don't think that drought has that big of an impact for them. And they go after early plant life. And then climate warming overall across the West is increasing the range expansions of several grasshopper species. So what we're seeing is we're getting grasshoppers that are not from Colorado originally. They've not been seen here in our state before, but we're getting them from Arizona, we're getting them from Utah, we're getting them from Kansas, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and Montana. So they are coming, and they are coming over the mountains, and they are staying here. So that is part of the other problem that we have not seen in a very, very long time. We're talking like 100 plus years. So it's a massive jump in insects that we just really haven't seen before. I really wanted to show the current conditions for Fremont County. Again, this is off the U.S. Drought Monitor. They do a really nice job, and they pinpoint your county there. Again, you guys are sitting like a little abnormally dry. They say your county is about 46% abnormally dry. So this is just something you can kind of monitor, especially like in the dead of winter when you're thinking about your garden, right? And you're thinking about what do you want to plant, when should you plant, all these things, and you're thinking about your management strategies. Watch the drought monitor, because that impacts the insect species you're going to have to deal with and how soon they will start getting to your seedlings. So that's something to think about. All right, so the other big part of why is this happening and what can we expect this year is, so we were in El Nino from a climate perspective for a really long time. That's when our trade winds weaken. Warm waters pushed back east towards the west coast of the Americas. Overall, we are drier and warmer than normal. And now we switched. We are now in La Nina. So that creates an opposite impact. Colorado is in a weird in-between flux that you'll see on the next slide picture-wise. So we have a chance of warmer and a little bit more precipitation, and we also don't. So it kind of depends on how strong and how weak La Nina is. Yes?
Can you direct me to a drought monitor, how I can
Absolutely. So her question was to direct her to a drought monitor, or how to find that. If you simply put into Google Colorado drought monitor, it pulls it up, and they release a new one every Thursday. And it shows the whole state, but then you can also narrow it down by county. It will give you year to date. It will give you month by month forecast, and then it will also give you a 3-month forecast of what they expect the conditions to be. And they usually will also give you temperature as well, which is really nice. So from a planting perspective, you can kind of predict a little bit of what the climate's going to do. Obviously, it's the weather, right? They could be 100% wrong, but it's somewhere to start. So, yeah, I didn't put it on our QR sheet, but if you just Google Colorado Drought Monitor, it's the very first one that pops up on Google. So hopefully this will play. So this is a nice, easy video that explains the whole swing really nicely for you guys.
Warmer or colder than average ocean temperatures in one part of the world can influence weather around the globe. Boggles the mind, right? Here's how it works.
Let me figure out where the sound's coming from so we can put the mic to it. Is it the projector?
Yeah, put the mic. Just put your mic right here, and it should.
Trade winds, which blow from
You guys
east
hear
to
that?
west, push warm surface waters towards Asia, piling it up in the Western Pacific. In some years, though,
Yeah?
the trade winds
There you go.
weaken. The warm surface water moves east and reduces upwelling of cold water off the coast of South America. Climatologists call this El Nino. Its climate impacts show up mostly in the wintertime over North America. The warmer ocean fuels an intensification and southward shift of the jet stream. This brings flooding to the southern United States and warmer, drier conditions over parts of the Pacific Northwest, northern U.S., and Canada. But eventually, those trade winds pick up again and sometimes become even stronger than normal. When that happens, they blow the warm water back into the western Pacific and restart the upwelling of cool water towards the surface in the eastern Pacific. These strong trade winds are a signature of what is called La Nina, unusually cold conditions in the tropical Pacific that displace the jet stream northward. La Nina can lead to drought in the southern U.S. and cooler temperatures, heavy rains, and flooding in the Pacific Northwest. El Nino and La Nina together are part of a cycle that influences extreme weather and can impact food production, water supply, and even human health, not just in the U.S., but in many parts of the globe.
All right, I know that might have been a little hard to hear for everybody, but I will make sure that Kelsey has a copy of this presentation. So if you want to rewatch that or you want to know more, you should be able to access everything at a later date. So don't stress if you couldn't hear everything. But what I really want to show is this better picture that kind of shows our swing. So Colorado's here on our map, same spot over there. So we were in El Nino, so we had warm, kind of coming in, and wet, which is why we kind of saw like a lot more snowpack, things like that, but then we got really dry. And again, so we're going to flip that. So we have cold air from above, we have dry underneath us, and they're kind of competing. And because we're on the lower part of the state, we get just the touches of both of those. So that's why they're saying they're not exactly sure how much we will get. They're predicting it's kind of a weak impact with this particular cycle of the first year of it. So they're kind of all going, we'll see how much. It might be more of an average year when we talk about precipitation and temperature, but there is a chance that we're going to stay a little colder and that we're going to stay a little drier. So that's what the experts in the weather places are saying, but we'll see what happens. So how all this relates to grasshoppers. Now we'll get into the nitty-gritty of grasshoppers and all of our friends. So grasshoppers themselves are related to katydids and crickets, but they're not the same insect. So the first picture is a katydid, and I do have one that I will pass around here in a little bit. So a katydid does not have the same impact as a grasshopper. So you don't want to just kill everything that looks like a grasshopper. You do want to keep some of these around. They do have benefits. So don't kill a katydid. And if you don't know the difference between a cricket and a grasshopper, crickets don't have as big hind legs. They can't fly as far and they can't jump as high, and they make the noise. They rub their legs together. Grasshoppers don't do that. So if you just watch them for a hot second, you can tell if it's a grasshopper versus a cricket. And I can tell you, a lot of people think they are the same bug. They are not. And crickets won't have the same absolute plant destruction that you will see with grasshoppers. So it's really important that you can identify them, because if you just have a bunch of crickets instead of grasshoppers, you don't need to go out and buy a bunch of pesticides and bird food and a bunch of other stuff to try to get rid of them, because they're not going to impact your plant life the same way that grasshoppers would. So it's really important to identify them. And then when we talk about grasshoppers, any of them that are bigger, regardless of species, the bigger ones are always the females. So when we start talking about which ones you want to target as they get older and they mature, the bigger ones are the ones you want to try to get rid of, because those are the females, those are the ones that carry our eggs. So that's really important. So it's easy to see, and I will start passing these around. Whoop, we lost the lake. These big guys, these are our plains lover grasshoppers. You'll notice they do have wings, but they are the only species in this part of the world that cannot fly, because their body mass is too big for their wing size. So they do have wings, they cannot fly. So even as adults, they can't fly, they do have wings, they still have to hop or kind of walk everywhere. But the ones that have F is a female, the one that has a B is boy, because the M wouldn't work very well with my Sharpie. But you can see how much bigger our female is in comparison to our male. It's really easy to see that on a plains lover species, but regardless of what species you have of grasshopper, the female is always larger, because the male gets on top and then inseminates her, and she carries him around for forever until he falls off or another male beats him off. So the woman does all the work in grasshopper world. So I know. We're not here to talk about gender norms. We're here to talk about grasshopper stuff. So you can pass those around. You can look at those. The other big thing I want to talk about is with grasshoppers, every species, and I know this question comes up a lot, is why aren't the birds eating the big guys, right? Like, they look really juicy. If you look at the big ones when they come around, you'll see this black stuff coming out of their mouth. Grasshoppers have a tar-like substance that's really close to like chewing tobacco when you think about it. That is really poisonous to birds, and it gums up their beaks where they can't open their beaks. And if it gets in their nostrils, they'll suffocate. So on the big guys, they don't eat the body parts. They'll just rip them apart on their legs, but they typically don't go after their body because of the tobacco piece. Yeah.
Is that true for guineas and chickens also?
It's not so much for guineas and chickens because they're bigger, so they can normally swallow like the whole thing instead of having to rip them apart. But the smaller bird species like finches and songbirds and robins, they can't always do that with some of these big species. So they might pick at them, but they're not going to fully eat them. So that's a big thing. And grasshoppers can survive, like if you take off a couple legs, they're still going to move around and eat a bunch of your plants. They'll just do it slower. So yeah.
I've had an incredible amount of birds in my yard.
Mm-hmm.
And I did see a lot of mating grasshoppers, so I probably have a lot of eggs. Is that why I've got so many birds? I've never had this many before.
So she asked, she's had a large influx of birds in her yard, and she saw a lot of mating grasshoppers, therefore a lot of eggs. Are they correlated? Yes, it can be. Do you know what species of birds offhand? Robins. Robins love them. Robins go after grasshoppers like no other, so they probably found yours as a hot spot, and they're eating them. So attracting very specific species to your yard, if you're going to do birds as a natural control method, robins are like one of the biggest species. So robins and blue jays are like the really big ones you want to encourage. They eat a lot of them. They are bigger species birds, so their mouths are bigger, so they can eat the bigger guys that you see out there, versus like if you get a lot of the little ones, you get little grackles, you get all those, they don't typically, they'll eat some of them, but it's not enough of a dent, really. So just be aware of that. So if you go out and buy birdseed, try to get ones that attract some of the bigger species. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, good question. Grasshoppers are most active during the day, and we'll go over when and why, but they will feed at night. They just don't move around as much because they are kind of heat reliant with the way their exoskeleton is set up. They don't have nests or territories, so they kind of just wander and eat and mate until they die. So they don't really stick in one position, and you can't really encourage them to go one way or the other. They just do what they want to do. There's a lot of known predators, so I'm going to pass this one around now. So this is why I said it's really important to know what the insect is you're looking at. Don't just kill everything, because you might kill the good guys that are helping you. So one of them, this steel blue cricket hunter. this guy right here on the edge, they have a stinger that can give you septic shock on humans if you get bit by one of these guys. We have them everywhere in Pueblo, and they follow the riverbeds. So you guys have them here as well, just because we're neighbors, and they follow the Arkansas. So you hear them flying. They're pretty big. They look like a wasp. They're in the wasp family species, but they don't really, they have underground nests and things like this. They don't nest in trees or anything like that. They are more solitary individuals. So if you see these and they're bright and vibrant in color, they're not an insect you want to squish. You do want to leave them alone. They can get a little territorial if you mess with them. They will go after you and sting you. It will hurt a lot, but they do eat a lot of grasshoppers. So keep these guys in mind. The other ones, this is a stink beetle, so it's not the one that eats grasshoppers, but there's a lot of ground beetle species that will also go after smaller grasshopper species. So encouraging beetle life is another really good way that you can encourage some predator species in your garden and your acreage that will get grasshoppers just naturally. So I will pass these around as well. So life cycle wise, so we have around 11,000 species, and actually I just got a notification today and I didn't get to change the slide before I came here. 16 new species were found last month in the United States in shrubbery. So that number has increased. And we have over 100 different grasshopper species in Colorado, and because of what we saw last year, they're doing a lot more trapping because they believe that there's a lot more new species here in our state that they haven't even categorized yet. So be aware that there's a lot of different grasshopper species. They are all different, and just you can tell a lot by the color, by their face, and their wings, and the noise they make when they fly. So we'll talk about some of that and why that's important. So when we think about their life cycle, grasshoppers start out as eggs, and they're really, really tiny. They're like almost microscopic. They're really hard to see with the naked eye. It's very rare if you ever end up finding grasshopper eggs, just because they're so small.
Are they white?
They can be white. She asked if they were white. They can be white. They can be yellow as well, and even like semi-clear. So they can be, they're like tiny little pearls, really. They're super, super small. So you can see them with the naked eye, but it's really tough. They are always in clusters. So if you see clusters of tiny little pearl-like beads, like in that first inch of the soil or under a lot of leaf cover, it's most likely grasshopper eggs. So if you're looking for them. They lay the eggs in late summer, early fall in our area. That's typically around right before the first frost. So they start mating in June and August. They'll mate all the way into September, and then after that they're kind of laying eggs. So early September, mid-September, we're starting to see the females start laying their eggs, and they'll go all the way to doing that until the first frost kills them off in around Halloween time. So that's kind of how they go. They do overwinter. There are some species that overwinter as adults, but here in our portion of the state, we don't really have any that we know of right now that do that. There might be some, so if you guys do see any that are starting out now in the next couple weeks that are already very mature, already have wings, please let me know. I brought a lot of contact cards because I want to know. Did you? You already see some? All right. Sir, you and I are going to talk. So, but if you guys are seeing that, please let me know, because that is a really big deal when we talk about that species, that range expansion. We need to know that. That's a really big deal. Because normally what happens with most of our species is they'll hatch in March or April. That's the general normal time. So what you guys saw last year when they started hatching in February, really out of the norm, way too early. Because then what happens is grasshoppers molt. They go through, it differs per species, but they can molt between 5 and 6 times and become an adult. This happens in about 3 weeks. So they go from hatching, they're a baby, and then they molt 5 or 6 times, and by week 3, they're a fully blown adult. So it's really, really fast. So when we talk about management strategies, it is a timing game. Because if you wait a day, a week, you're already too late, okay? And that's a big deal because when they become adults, that exoskeleton normally hardens. It's like a coat of armor. So if you are using sprays, it doesn't get through the armor. You are wasting your money. You might as well go put it in your fire pit and burn it. You're not doing anything. So when we're talking about adults, the biggest thing you need to do is you need to bait, you need to do biological controls, you need to encourage natural predators, things like that, because a lot of the sprays, unless you're going to get pretty high-level chemicals, are not going to get through that exoskeleton. What was interesting last year that you all had was a lot of your species, even as adults, were not hardening. They were still squishy. So a lot of you might have noticed that if you picked up a grasshopper or you got so tired you were running out there with your clippers and snipping them in half in the air. I got a lot of videos of that. You could do that. They were squishy when they shouldn't have been squishy. That is really weird. So a lab up in Montana is asking for field samples this year. So if you are seeing that at all, at any point during the year, where you are having full-fledged adults that have wings that can fly, but they are squishy when they are still alive and you can grab them, please collect them or call me and I will come out and collect them because we need to understand why. It's most likely a mineral deficiency or something that's going on the plant life, but the problem is if that's happening to our plants, that's happening to our soil, which if you all are here from a master gardener perspective, that's a really big concern, right? Because that means you might have to do more soil amendments this year, because if that's happening on an insect level, that's happening on everything else. So, cause for concern. I might encourage you all to get your soil tested, because that means there's something going on in our area, okay? And then the nymph stage we kind of talked about, that's where they're just growing, and the biggest thing between the nymph and an adult is the nymphs don't have fully developed wings. So they can be different sizes, different colors, but they just can't fly. They can have wings, but they can't use them, is the biggest difference. So that's how you would know between a nymph and an adult. So life stage and species. So knowing what life stage and species you have is the most critical part when we think about management and proper control methods. Like we said, sprays are not effective for full-blown adults. Grasshoppers, different species hatch at different times of the year. That's the other big thing. And they can have multiple hatches. So just because you went and sprayed one time, you're like, yes, I got them all, I made it, I did the 2-week thing, I listened to Beth, I got it. Yeah, but then next month happens and a new species hatch and it started all over. So all you did was weaken the competition, right? So be aware of that different species hatch at different times. So on your little handy document, on the one that says Colorado Grasshopper Webinar Docs, it's the second QR code on that one has like 15 different fact sheets and different ID sheets, okay, that will show you different species and when they hatch, what they look like, what color they are, how big they get. They give you all of that information. So, and then it tells you what works best for that particular species when. So it's really, really helpful, and it's super easy. Yes, ma'am.
If you put plastic down over your garden now for a week or so, will that kill the eggs that might be hatching now, or kill the
So she asked if you put plastic sheeting over your garden for like a week right now, will it kill the eggs? Most likely not, because they're really close. If they're not already hatching, they're really close. All you're doing is kind of making it like a greenhouse effect.
Will it kill them? I mean, if you leave it on there longer?
It will not, because even if they hatch out as adults and there's literally anything to eat under there, like any amount of plant life that's coming up, even if it was just like grass roots that you didn't plant but just kind of migrated into there, they'll eat it, they'll survive. And at a certain point, they will get big enough, they will chew through the plastic. So you might get some of them, but you're not going to get all of them. So you can definitely attempt it, but just know you're just kind of knocking back the threshold numbers.
Because of health issues, I covered my garden with plastic last year and cut a few holes for the few things I could take care of, which were eaten. But that cover's still on there, so I figured I had less eggs being laid, but that doesn't help when you've got the rest of the yard, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't gain anything except less weeds.
Yeah, so you helped with weed suppression, absolutely, but not the grasshopper infestation. Yeah. So she said she had plastic covering that she did last year, and she left it on throughout the year. Would that impact egg levels for the rest of the yard? Unfortunately not. It does limit where you had the sheeting because they couldn't get in there and lay eggs, but if you didn't do that on everywhere, then yeah, all it did is do that. Yes, ma'am.
Last year I tried for my tree lilies that were eaten to stems. I sprayed off the grasshoppers, just off the stems, really, really good, and I put a netting on and wetted down with rocks. And it didn't recover. I thought it might. When I pulled it off, there were 3 grasshoppers inside. Did they eat through the netting?
Yes. So she wrapped a plant and netting and pulled a lot of them off, sprayed a lot of them off, but when she pulled it off later on, there were still 3 grasshoppers inside the plastic netting and the plant was dead. She asked if they were able to chew through it. Yes. Once they get to that 4th, 5th, what we call instar molting stage, they have big enough teeth, and if you look at the big ones going around, you can see how big their teeth are. They're very sharp. They are like chewing mandible pieces. They're not like some insects that grind stuff from side to side. They can grab, rip, and tear, and they can get through a lot of plastic. So yeah, and I saw them eating people's siding off their houses last year. So if you think they can't, if they can eat through somebody's house siding, they absolutely can eat through your plastic. Yes, in the back. Yeah.
Is there a pesticide or something that we can put down? We have a lot of unvegetated area and just with dust and stuff as we're landscaping some of it. But there's a lot of bare. Is there a pesticide that we can put down and either use the drag or rototiller and work that in to kill the eggs now before they start to hatch?
So she asked, is there a pesticide that they could use now before the eggs hatch that they could spread on a big amount of area and work in and kill the eggs off? Unfortunately, no. There is no chemical that is developed right now for grasshopper species that affect the egg stage. You do have to wait until they are hatched for any chemical, whether it be a spray, a bait, or anything like that. There is nothing on the market right now that does affect just the egg laying stage, unfortunately. Yes.
You said it molt 5 or 6 times a year. What's the time frame for that? How quickly does that happen?
So it is for most species, they molt between 3 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
So it does differ per species, but that's the time frame. So the minute you start seeing the little itty bitty babies, the clock starts. Yeah.
I got some stuff from Brady's. It's in a brown paper bag. It is a poison for the grasshoppers, and you just throw it out like this. It's also safe for dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm.
And it did help.
Yeah.
I just didn't start it soon enough.
Yes. So she is talking. She applied a bait, and it is called Eco Brand. We will talk about it. So there are some baits and sprays and other things that are pet safe and are pretty people safe. Yeah, and it is granular, which is really good if you have a lot of pollinators or other things that you were trying to manage and you can't spray. Or if from a garden perspective, you can't spray because maybe you're organic. So you can't have anything that's foliar application. So we'll get into that, I promise. Any other quick questions? Okay, we'll keep going. So there are 3 main subfamilies of grasshoppers that we're going to talk about. So we have slant-faced, spur-throated, and band-winged. So slant-faced, when they're that nymph, that immature stage, they're brown or gray in color, and they have clear wings. So that's the really big indicator. They have really big heads, and their faces are slanted when you look at them straight on. So they're literally called slant-faced because of the way they look. Spur-throated, they're green when they're small, so immature, but they change color as they get older. So if it stays green the whole time, it doesn't necessarily mean it's spur-throated. It could be a different species. And they have a spur or a spine on their throat in between their front legs, and I have a picture on the next slide to show that. And then band-winged, you guys have seen a lot of these. They have the bright red or yellow hind wings as adults. They have a lot of color. So like, when you walked and like 500 million of them took off, but you saw flashes of color, right? A lot of those ones are the band wings. Those are the adults in the early spring, and then they have 3 or 4 hatched seasons throughout the year. So you'll have babies and immatures all the way up until late August. So when you have the ones that make a lot of noise when they fly, you see all the color, those are the band winged. So, all right, so here are our lovely pictures. So here's our slant-faced. Those are our clear wings, okay? Our banged winged, there's a lot of color on our legs, okay? And then our spur-throated. So that little notch that you see where the blue arrow is pointing, that is that spur that you'll want to look for. So we do this, and this is really important, because there are so many species, and I will go back to that slide, but the reason I want you guys to understand why species matter is because depending on what the name is, tells you what they're going to eat and how long they will hang around. Some of them have shorter hatching cycles than others, which means you can plan how much bait you're going to buy or how often you're going to put your chickens out or whatever the case is, you're going to know what they're going to do. For example, like the differential grasshopper, that's the most common one, and it goes after almost everything in your garden. It only doesn't eat like 2 species when you look at the grasshopper eat list, so that one's a really big one. But then if you look at the one that is the, where is it? The migratory grasshopper, it really only goes after big croplands. So it likes a monoculture. So if you think about like over in my neck of the woods in Pueblo where we have fields and fields of chili peppers, it hangs out there a lot. If you are a backyard gardener and you have melons and peppers and strawberries and eggplants and a lot of diversity, it's not going to hang out in your yard as much because it wants that monoculture deal, and they will hatch at different times. So same thing, and the migratory grasshopper, they can also have longer migration flights. So when you think about our management strategy, if you're going to use like a buffer zone of plants or a buffer zone of pesticides, migratory grasshoppers, you can push them out. They will leave and they will keep going. That's the nice thing. The other species may not do that. They might hop your neighbor's fence, decide your neighbor has a really nice grapevine, and sit there for forever, and then lay all their eggs right along your fence line, right? Right? Yeah. So knowing the species really matters because it affects how you're going to control them and what you're going to use and when you're going to use it. So going back, pushing my button. So that is our differential grasshopper. I'm sure a lot of you saw this one. Our two-striped grasshopper. So you can see it's green with the yellow, right? So that's the one. Red leg grasshopper. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's got bright red legs. Plains lover. Those are the big ones you guys are passing around. Clear winged. Exactly what it sounds like. They have big clear wings. The green streaked grasshoppers are the really bright neon ones. So they start out neon, they get pretty big, and they stay really bright. The ones that got big, that were green but had the hump, it looked like a dinosaur, if you guys saw some of those are not green streaked, those are the big crested grasshopper, different species, okay? So just because they're a similar color doesn't mean they're the same species. So, and especially I saw on a lot of your properties in this area, you guys had between 10 and 15 species every square yard that I counted. That's a lot. That's a lot. So if you are seeing that again, and you call me up and you say, I know for a fact I have red-legged, I have clear-winged, I have plains lover, and I have two-striped, can you come and take a look? Absolutely, because knowing that they're coexisting, that their range is expanding, that's again important for those mapping structures we talked about earlier, okay? So this is why I encourage you, know your grasshoppers, know how to ID them, because when I ask you, what are you seeing, I need to know what you guys are seeing because I don't live where you live. So that's why you seeing it is really important.
Would it help, like, to put them in a glass jar and send you a picture?
Yes, if you can do that, that is fantastic. The really easiest way to to kill them, if you will, because they lose their color really quickly, and that's one of the biggest key identifications when it comes to grasshoppers. If you can scoop them up, put them in a jar, like a Cool Whip tub, whatever, and put them in your fridge. If you put them in the freezer, the color breaks down in a matter of hours. So I need them in the fridge, not the freezer. If you want to they will die. It will be slow, and you will hear them popping like popcorn. So as long as you're okay with that, or you tell like your husband, like, don't open the Cool Whip jar in the fridge, right? Thinking it's Cool Whip, it's a bunch of grasshoppers. We did that at work, and we didn't warn everybody in the staff room, and I can tell you, we got yelled at because it's not a fun day to be an extension agent. So warn people in your household if you're going to do that, what container they're in, because they will stay fairly active for a couple hours before the cold gets to them and they are deceased. You can also kill them with like isopropyl alcohol. You can also do it with hydrogen peroxide on a cotton ball. So if you put them like in a gallon-sized zip bag and you put that stuff on a cotton ball and then put it in the bag and seal it, the fumes will kill them. And that works a little better if you don't have freezer room or whatever, or if I'm going to see you in the next couple days, that's a little easier because then I can dissect them. I can kind of look at what's going on, especially if they're squishy. Because if you put them in the fridge, everything hardens. I can't do any testing. So if you are getting the squishy ones and you are getting different species and they're all saying squishy, please do the method with the cotton ball in a gallon-sized zip bag or a sandwich bag and kill them that way if I can't get to you very quickly. So, okay?
How do you know if it's squishy or not?
So to know if it's squishy or not,
Touch it.
that is really the only way, because you can very much tell the difference when you grab an adult. It's like the whole actual body, the abdomen is very hard. The whole thing is incredibly hard. If you really squish them, you can squish them in your hand. But what we saw last year is if you just barely like squeezed them, they would pop apart as adults. So I mean, they're like squishy, like squishier than a jelly bean. So a lot of grandkids were deployed last year, I can tell you that. So yes, if you have young children, you know, they are really good. You can ask them to be your grasshopper squishers. So and be like, tell me how squishy it is. Yes, ma'am.
What tools do you recommend to catch them?
So catching them, the easiest way is a butterfly net. It is too hard to use literally anything else because especially if you're trying to get adults or things like that can fly. Some of them can fly very far or very high, where you simply just can't catch them with like a cup or something like that. If you can get them in that early stage, then you can generally just like walk by and scoop them with a cup or something like that if they can't fly away from you. But at some point, their legs do get strong enough where they can hop pretty far, even if they can't fly. So a net works the best.
So then the hope is, squeeze the net, dump it into.
Yes, I didn't bring my net. I should have. But yes, there is a particular way to do it, and I can't hold the mic and demonstrate this. But if you can imagine, I have a butterfly net. If you scoop, twist, try to get them all on the bottom of the net, twist. So you don't want a ton because if you get too many, they're just going to come out. So you only want like. The best way I found is between 5 and 8 grasshoppers in a medium-sized butterfly net at a time. Otherwise, they're just going to come out and you're going to lose them all. Twist it so that's tight in the middle, and then flip it so that it's going into your bag, your bucket, whatever it is, and then just like push them down into it. Don't shake them out because they will pop out and they will find a hole and they will escape, and then you're back to square one. So, really good activity again for grandchildren. Fantastic. Or just young children. They're really good at it. So put them to work because they're good. They're good at it. Tools of identification. If you took this class and then maybe you don't see any for a month and you're like, I can't remember any of the pictures I saw. What do I do? There are ID identifications. So there is grasshoppers of the western United States, and you can do it by color, you can do it by size, you can do it by mouth parts, what they're eating, all that good stuff, and it will identify the specific species for you, and it gives you pictures. So you can say, oh yes, this is what I saw, or no, it's not, I need to keep searching. It will give you it by county, it will give you it by state as well. So this tool is really, really helpful. I encourage you to check it out and have it on your back pocket. It does work on your phone. The other one is on the bottom of your page, there's Hopper Wiki. That is a newly funded research project being held by Arizona State University, but it's open to the public, and there's a lot of identification species tools in there, which are also really easy to use on your phone. So they're really mobile. You can take pictures of things and upload them, and it will give you a species identification. So again, I encourage you to check out these resources, have them in your back pocket, maybe stick this to your fridge, so that way you can find it easily and get the resources you need. So, okay. So, when we talk about grasshoppers, and no one likes this part, we have to think about management instead of eradication, because unfortunately, because we have so many species, they're so prolific, you are never going to get rid of all of them. You can't, unless you were out there with a flamethrower, which the National Guard did when we had the plagues back in the 1800s. They were walking the streets. There's a documentary on it if you're ever curious. There is a documentary. They walked the streets with flamethrowers and grenades because there were grasshoppers and locusts that were taller than most of the buildings in downtown Colorado Springs. And that is the only way they cleared them out. So that is the only way you can actually eradicate them, is you play war with the grasshoppers. And it's not very easy. So we look at management, not eradication. So then we have to talk about threshold level. That is always the goal when we talk about grasshoppers. So my little leaf diagram is really nice. This is a soybean leaf. So when we talk about threshold level, we're talking about a percentage. That's why we do it in counts of square yardage. If you are over that 50%, you have no leaf left, right? But if you have 10%, your leaf is probably going to recover. It may not be the prettiest thing, but it is getting nutrients, it is photosynthesizing, it is doing the things, and if you can encourage that plant to have more robust leaves, new leaves, you're doing soil amendments, you're kind of coaxing it along, that the plant itself is probably going to survive. Your crop yield is still going to be low, right? It may not be the best production ever, but you're still going to get something instead of at a 50% where you are getting absolutely nothing, and that plant's going to die pretty soon after that point. So that's kind of the goal, is what can you live with? The other big thing I want you all to think about is if you are seeing really high levels again, where are areas that you are willing to sacrifice? Because that is the name of the game. So if you have a really nice garden area, and the rest of it is trees and shrubs and maybe your grass and stuff like that, what matters to you more? The trees and the shrubs and the grass, or the garden that you went and spent $1,000 on in seedlings and irrigation, right? Because you can redo your grass. You can go get a pallet of sod. The trees may be devastated, but they're also longer lasting. They will come back. There are things you can do. So you're gonna have to pick, especially if your infestation levels are really high, pick your battle zones, because the grasshoppers are going to make you do that, because you can't get them all. You will not win, okay? So think of that when you think about where you're gonna plant things. How are you gonna be strategic? And especially because we all know about companion planting and plants that don't get along with each other right, or maybe you need to rotate your plants. Think about that. There are some plants that grasshoppers don't really like. They won't eat as much until they get too hungry, like the artificial wreath situation, right? But hopefully we can downscale our threshold levels where they don't do that. So grasshoppers, they really don't like things that are hot. So things that are like pepper-based, they don't like the taste of it. If push comes to shove and there's nothing else to eat, they will eat it. They don't like to eat it. They do like to be a little selective if they have the option. So if you're thinking about how do I kind of prevent them, maybe you can make a barrier around most of your planting area of pepper plants, of really, really hot species. The hotter, the better, okay? You don't want to go and get just like a bell pepper species, lead right through that. The hottest thing you can get and plant it, the more you will protect that. And kind of make it where the plants are touching so that they kind of build a wall, so it kind of keeps them from going in there, okay? So that's one plant you can look at when we think about a management area. So when we talk about threshold numbers, and we looked at the maps earlier, they base threshold numbers off these numbers. So we're talking 15 to 20 nips for every square yard, or if they're adults, 8 to 10. And these numbers are done with visual counts and what they call a sweep net. A sweep net is like a massive, big butterfly net, if you will, that's usually held up by people, or they put it between ATVs and they go and sweep an area and they collect a lot of grasshoppers at one time. Visual counts, I do have things, I didn't bring them with me, but I have cards, and if you want it, I can get it to you after this event, where you count, it's a square yard in front of you, and when you count how many grasshoppers jump out of that square yard. You only count what jumps out, you do not count any of them that jump in. That is how you do a count, okay? So if you go into your square yard and you've mapped it out, right? Because you can go out with a tape measure and you can figure out a square yard and then pick a spot, walk it, and then you can count how many grasshoppers get out of it. They have to actually leave the perimeter of that square yard to be in your count. So if you are sitting as adults and you have more than 8, you are at max capacity, okay? So, and you don't need to do this, like if this was our acreage right here, this whole room, you don't have to do this whole room. You can do one side, and then a side on the back. That's going to give you an average for the whole area, and if every count you do is over 8, you are way, way over threshold. You need to do something. If you are sitting at 5 on average for all those square yardage, you're getting pretty close, right? You want to do something. So that is how you can kind of get a really good hold. If you can't get a hold of me, you can't get a hold of the USDA, and you're like, I don't know how to know where I'm at threshold level outside of all my plants are eaten, go out and count. You can visually see this, and you can make your own notes. And I have count charts in that same webinar document folder that's on here. That's number 2. There is an actual count sheet that you can download and you can print from the University of Wyoming, and you can make your counts with that, with direction and everything like that, and notes of what they're eating, what the temperature was, stuff like that, which is really helpful information. So, and then those are our egg pods, so you guys can see. So like that's a quarter for reference. They're tiny, they're itty bitty. So it's really hard to see. Females lay roughly 25 egg pods at a time. That's in each egg pod. There's 4 to 40 eggs in a pod, and there's 100 to 200 eggs for every female that lays each pod, but they can lay up to 500 eggs per pod catch. Okay, so our little pod catch next to our quarter, that could be 500 eggs. Okay, that's one lay. That's one male mating. Okay, they will keep knocking males off and getting different partners. So if you do nothing and you had high levels last year and all your females laid a batch of eggs, you can imagine how many grasshoppers there are that are going to hatch. Those numbers go really high really fast, which is why it's so important to get ahead of this early. So management control. controls. Most of you that are gardeners, you've probably heard of this term, are IPM, or what we call integrated pest management. At the top is what we use the least of, at the bottom is what we try to use the most of. So at the top we have control, so we have chemical at the very top, but in this case, unfortunately, there is not a lot of biological controls that work very well for grasshoppers, so we are kind of stuck in that higher part of our triangle there. There's mechanical, physical, and natural control. When we talk about those things, I'm not going to go into too much depth, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, it's number 4 on here, the big webinar one. I held a really big statewide webinar last year that is recorded, that is online. It is a little over an hour, but there's 4 experts. There's 3 entomologists and one of the leading grasshopper researchers that's been doing this for 20 plus years. And he goes over the mechanical controls that you can do in rangeland, in small acreage, in backyard spaces, and in urban settings to control grasshoppers regardless of species. I encourage you to watch it. I encourage you to check it out. There's a ton of information in there from the different speakers. And in that big folder document, that is the second QR code, you have all of their presentations. So you can go through and get all of that and most of their handouts that they talk about specifically. So it's really, really cool. Again, you have to think about what are your goals when we talk about management. Some folks have a lot of acreage, a lot of space to deal with. That's a lot different if you have just a very small backyard garden that's maybe the size of one of these tables. That's a lot more manageable, okay? So think about the size you're going to try to work on. Birds, poultry engagement, a lot of you realize that chickens, ducks, geese, guinea fowl, a lot of them will eat them, but they're not insect selective. So you have to remember that. Like if you have birds, it's great. They definitely will do an impact, but they will eat everything else too, right? They don't go after just the grasshoppers, so be aware of that. There are a lot of beneficial insects that we talked about. Robber flies are another one you can entice. Wasps, all types of wasps that we have here actually will eat a lot of grasshoppers. And so I can tell you, I do personally have chickens, but I also had 3 wasp nests that I left in one area of my yard. I had 0 grasshoppers on that side because the wasps took out all of them, okay? So I know a lot of people don't like wasps, but if you have them and it's a pretty thriving colony and it's not an area that you constantly go into or a spot where maybe the kids are playing or the dogs and you can leave the nests alone, I would encourage you to leave it because they will have a big impact on your grasshopper numbers. So. Praying mantis eat a lot of them. So praying mantis are really good. You can obviously get those from nurseries and release them. So that's a big one. And dragonflies. So dragonflies are another really big one that will take them out. So. And then insecticides, baits, we're going to kind of get into. Just be aware of what is in the label because it can harm a lot of our beneficials, like our beetles can be really impacted because they have a similar morphology. And same thing with bees, and a lot of our other pollinators can be impacted depending on what chemical you're using. So please be aware of the labels. Also have PPE, which is our personal protection, and we'll talk about a lot of that in the next couple slides. So now we're going to talk about time to control. The younger, the better, right? Adults are really difficult, so we really want that prime stage you're looking for is that 3rd to 4th stage molt. So they're a little bit bigger. So here I have a nice progression model. This is the first 3 right here are the same species. Okay, this is an immature. This is really baby. Then he got a little bit bigger, and then we have that's fully mature. By this point, it's too late. Okay. So this one you could affect by the baits, maybe, if you're lucky, but you really want to get them in this stage when they're younger. If not, even in between these 2 is what you're looking for. So I'm going to pass this around so you guys can kind of see. I'm going to start it over here. And that's kind of the stage you want to look for, okay? So I would encourage you to go out and take measurements, especially as you start to see them, and watch how fast they grow. Take measurements, take samples, because that will give you a good idea of when to do it. The other big thing is look for hatching sites, because when they're small, they can't fly, and their legs aren't very strong, so they can't go very far from where they hatch. They're going to hatch in places that are really densely covered, or places that had a lot of leaf cover, plant cover, that weren't really super disturbed. That's where they like to be, because they can only really put them in the first less than an inch of soil. So somewhere where the ground was really soft, somewhere where there was a lot of cover for them, like big patches of if you mowed everywhere except maybe a down part that your mower couldn't really get to because it was boggy, I'm willing to bet that's going to be a hatch site. okay? So I want you to go out, look at your property, look for areas that are really overgrown. If your vegetation is up to like my knee, it's too thick. That's too high for them. You're looking at something that's your ankle or less, okay, in coverage. You don't want something that's super thick, okay? And you want to look for a warm day. You're not going to see them if it's below 50 degrees when they're small. You need to go out when we get over 50 degrees. Go out when it's sunny, because when they're small like that, they do rely on a lot of sun temperature, okay? So go out when it's sunny, go over 50 degrees, look for those hatching sites and flag them. Put a flag. They can't go too far from that hatching site in that first week of life, okay? So that's going to be really critical, because wherever they come from, that's where they're going to expand from, okay? So if you're like by week 2, you know you got to do something because maybe they're growing pretty fast, then you know exactly where to put the bait and you know exactly how far to stop. So you don't have to do all the acreage. You could maybe do just a couple areas and get your money's worth, okay? So that's why I encourage you to find those hatching sites. And then dew has an impact on them when they're small. If they're already adults, it doesn't have too much of an impact, but dew does have a lessening impact when they're small. So those first like 3 weeks of life is gonna really matter how fast they will start moving around in the morning. So if you have a cooler morning, and maybe it's mid-April, but we have a lot of dew on the ground, don't go out until the dew is gone. Okay, because the dew slows them down. They're not going to really be moving around. But if you are going to do a spray, that is when the time you would want to spray, because they're not going to move around a whole lot, and they're not going to fly. They can't fly when their wings are wet. So if you are doing a spray application, then you want to do it when the dew is out. If you're doing a bait application, don't do it when the dew is there. Okay? So those are really big takeaways. Yes?
We have an area in our backyard that is covered with some low-growing weeds.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands of seeds, it seems like, came out of that area. It's about as big as the top of that table. And I saw them when they were teeny.
Mm-hmm.
Can't we do something then to an area no bigger than that?
You could, and
what would you suggest?
At that stage, I would say to probably, because so sprays will get through their skin at that stage, and you can cover a bigger area than with the bait. And if you go out earlier in the morning before the bees leave hives, because when there's still dew on the ground, bees can't fly either. So that's the nice thing. So I would suggest in that stage, I would do a spray. I would do it very lightly, especially because if they're small, they can't fly. So you can get very low, very quick, because by the time the bees are out and flying, that will have burnt off or will have sunk in enough where it's not going to impact them in their flight zones. So in that stage, I would spray. Yeah. Anything bigger than that, where they're actively jumping and doing things where like you would have to cover them with a spray as they move, you would probably want to bait instead. Yeah.
And there are sprays that are safe for pets?
There are some, there's not many, so you'll really want to read the label, and we'll talk about what active ingredients are the ones that are a bit more toxic for animals, where you might, if you're going to do that, know that your animals cannot go in that area for the withdrawal period. So, yeah. Like we said, we kind of went over hatching sites, but this is what a hatching site would look like. All those little orange spots deals, those are hatching grasshoppers, okay? So it's really hard to find these, but you'll want to just look for them walking around. You'll see them being active when it's nice and warm out. So don't worry so much about finding where the eggs are. Just look for where there's a lot of them in one place and they're really small. That's a hatching site. Okay, so now we're going to start getting into everything. So I know a lot of people, especially a lot of gardeners, you guys want organic options, right? I caution you, and most of you know this if you're a master gardener, organic doesn't mean there's no chemicals. It just means that it's not something that is man-made. That's all it means. So like cyanide, it's organic because it's not man-made. It's just found naturally. But it is toxic, right? So be aware of the labels. Don't go for anything that just says organic because it doesn't mean it's completely safe. Keep things mowed because when they're nymphs, they struggle to go very far without wings. So if you really want to limit how far they're going to go in those early stages for easy management, keep things pretty well mowed so you can see them and they can't go very far. The taller stuff is they're going to hop from plant to plant because their wings aren't developed yet, okay? So, especially for the bigger acreage folks, try to keep it more like knee height if you can. Don't let it go too much higher than that as best you can because they will use that to their advantage and they will spread a lot farther, a lot quicker, okay? Flour works pretty well when they're small. You can use a sifter and you can cover them in it. And what it does is it gums up their mouth. Eventually they can get through it, or if it rains, you know, it washes off. But when they're small in that early stage, it can gum up their mouth. It can end up suffocating them, but you gotta do it when they're small. If you do it when they're older, it doesn't really work, okay? So, and it's just regular white flour, okay? So that's all it is. You have to reapply it every time it gets wet. So if your sprinklers come on, you get a rainstorm, you do it right after the dew, whatever, puddle comes up, you gotta reapply, right? It washes up. So, neem oil, a lot of people like this. It is pretty effective when it comes to grasshoppers, but it will kill almost every native bee and honeybee we have. It's really, really toxic to bees. So if you are a beekeeper, if your neighbor has bees, if you know you just get a lot of bees of different types in your yard, I caution you to be very careful of when you apply it. So using it at dusk is the best time to make sure you're not getting pollinators. It does also kill hummingbirds, and it will affect butterflies as well. So, and if you all haven't heard, the monarchs are now endangered. They are on the endangered species list as of this year. So be very, very careful using neem oil, okay? Neem oil does come as a liquid applicator. You can get it from Lowe's, Home Depot, most of the gardening stores have it, but just be aware it does have that impact, okay? Diatomaceous earth, which you can see there. So diatomaceous earth, a lot of you probably know this. You use it in your garden, you use it for your chickens, things like that. But the problem is, as you can see, it doesn't kill just grasshoppers. It kills a lot of other things, right? Because it dries them out, basically. So diatomaceous earth works really well if, say, maybe you went on vacation and you asked your daughter to control your grasshoppers, and she didn't do it, right? And you come back, and now you have all these adults, and you're like, what in the world do I do? Diatomaceous earth is a pretty good one if you need to stay organic for whatever reason. It will slow down because it does harden those exoskeletons. It does weaken it out, and eventually they dry out from the inside out. They die. It is a slower application process, but it does work. It can knock down those threshold levels. So that's something to keep in mind. Sprinkling boric acid is pretty effective. You can, again, get that over the counter. Kalon clay is another one. You can also make a natural bait bucket, and you can drown them. Again, this works for the ones that were really small, that maybe are a bit more active, that are walking around, moving around a lot, but they're not flying. You can make bait buckets by those hatching sites. That's another really good thing you can do. So what it is it's 10% molasses to 90% water. Molasses, they can smell it. Grasshoppers can smell things really, really well, actually, and that's how they turn into locusts, but we'll get into that. So if you do that, that's the big thing, it will be an attractant to them, okay? So wherever you put your bucket, just know you're ringing the dinner bell. So don't put it in the middle of your garden. Because if you Google that, AI tells you, yes, put the molasses on the garden. You're seasoning it. Don't do that, okay? You're gonna attract a lot of grasshoppers. It doesn't kill it. The water, they drown, okay? So that's what the bait bucket is. So they get in, they fall in, they're going after the molasses, they drown, okay? So that's what it is. And they drown to the viscosity between them. All right, a lot of people ask, what about how would we make something that's more organic, that's a liquid form? You can do like mint, eucalyptus, pepper, dish soap. So again, if you want to plant things, if you're thinking about planting companions or doing some barrier things, maybe you're trying to get them off your house. They don't like mint, they don't like eucalyptus. Again, if you have such high threshold numbers of what we saw last year, they will eat it. They will eat through it. So it doesn't mean they won't eat it, it just means they prefer not to. If you can knock back those threshold levels early on, keep these plants thriving, you will protect the other areas, okay? So really, really important. There are some plants that are sensitive to these oils that I have listed here. So just be aware of that if you are going to do this, you have a lot of different species on your property, be aware you can negatively impact some of your plant species because of that, okay? And then those are our dilution amounts for different, for soap sprays. So I will make sure you guys have copies of these slides, so don't panic if you don't get the picture. All right, again, the myths of grasshopper control. So I took a screenshot of what AI says. It says, to control grasshoppers with garlic, you can create a garlic spray by mixing garlic cloves with water. Garlic is like molasses. It's an attractant. But if you put it into Google tells you it kills them. It does not. This has been debunked multiple times by researchers, okay? So when you put things into Google about grasshoppers, be aware that when it says AI overview, you, remember that AI doesn't always give you the most correct. It gives you things that people put in the most, okay? It learns off human behavior. It doesn't mean it's correct information, okay? So if you are going to look for Grasshopper information, please put in like Grasshopper extension. Please put in Grasshopper EDU, something like that, so you are getting verified information that has been researched by a university or another agency, not something that AI decided was the way to go, because you could wind up just creating more issues for yourself, okay? That is an example of a bait bucket that you can see. So that's kind of what that looks like. Again, anytime you do a bait or a dust, because a lot of the pesticides can come in dust forms as well. If there's wind, if there's a rain event, you have to reapply it, okay? It's not a one and done situation. There is no silver bullet. And then if you hear about plant mesh, things like that, we kind of talked about it. They will eat through it. So just be aware that there are things you can definitely try. Just be aware of the effectiveness may have limited range because of when you apply it and how big your species are. Okay? Do I see a hand up? Yes, ma'am.
Is this something like a multi-year war type thing where you
Yes.
work on 1 year and you have to progressively get better?
Yes. She asked if this is a multi-year war situation. Absolutely. So the name of the game is management, and what you really want to do is you want to target the females to weaken their egg production. That's the name of the game. A lot of these baits and chemicals that we'll go into, that you see here on these, they have long-lasting effects. So even if it doesn't kill the female that year, you are infecting the eggs that she's carrying, which means they're going to be weaker for the environment. They may not all hatch, or maybe none of them hatch. Regardless of how many clutches of eggs she lays, they're weakened, okay? So using some of these chemicals, even if you don't kill the actual adult, and you're like, I sprayed, and they're still all walking around, but if they seem weaker, you're working, right? And you're winning the war. You may not win the battle that day, but you're winning the war. And sometimes, depending on your levels, that's the best you can do, right? So when we know insecticides, again, know your life cycles, know your species, really important. Read the label. So some sprays, most of the sprays can kill on contact or once they're ingested. So you really need to read the label, because some of them will say you can spray directly on the grasshoppers and it will kill them on contact if you get them early on. Some of them say you have to spray the plants that they're eating in order for them to ingest it, otherwise it doesn't work, okay? So not all sprays are equal. Please read the label. Dusts have to be reapplied, and they don't really stick to plants, so just be aware if you're trying to, again, just like dust an area, you want to go after the insect, not the plants, because it doesn't work when you do the dust that way. Then we have the brands, which are the granular deals, which go on the ground. They don't get on your plants, so if you're organic, you are worried about livestock, pets, people, things like that. The baits do work really well. They have a limited range of effectiveness, though, because they break down really quickly. So they only last for like a couple days. So if you are late in the season, you have a lot of adults that are flying, or you have a lot of those migratory ones, and you put a lot of bait down, maybe a quarter of them eat it, and then they leave, and that breaks down in about 4 days on average. So, you're wasting a lot of your money.
How well does that 7 work? I know a lot of it's sold.
Yeah, so 7 is a good one, but it's not the brand name that you want to go after, because 7 is a brand name. That's not a chemical name. The chemical you want to look for is carbile. And a lot of 7 products don't have that, okay? So if you see something that says 7, you're like, yeah, that's the one, I remember the class. If it doesn't have that chemical, it's not going to kill them, okay? It will kill other insects. It's not going to kill grasshoppers, okay? So carbile, that's the big takeaway. It is common in 7, but it's not in every 7 product. Corey's Bug Bait is another one that holds that. Promethean is a spray. You can get that in willy-nilly grasshopper bait. A lot of these other ones, like Eco Brand, you're looking for Semaspore. Semaspore is a biological control. So it works a lot like, if you all remember Nolabait back in the day, before the fire happened, that was a similar control. I do not have any confirmation that Nolabait will be available this year, so just be aware of that. We are still probably looking at another couple of years before Nolabait comes back on the market, so just be aware of that. So it's just an unfortunate thing. And that insecticides aren't selective, so they do kill whatever type of morphology will be affected by that chemical. It will kill everything it comes in contact with. So that includes ants, our beetle species, all those other things. So just be aware of that, that you can kill everything, which doesn't help the ecosystem. All right, So I know this is a little small, but what I really wanted you to pay attention to is this is an example of a pesticide bottle. The big things you want to read are active ingredient, okay? That's always on the front of the label. That's going to tell you what that chemical is. Again, on those documents you have, that will tell you the list. There is a document in the second QR code that gives you all of the chemicals you could ever want for grasshopper control. You can sit there in the store and make sure it matches one that will affect them in that life stage, okay? So know your chemicals, that's a big one. The other big one is first aid. It's generally on the back of the bottle, but it does have like a little first aid logo by it. Please read that before you apply it, because some of these chemicals, especially the sprays, if you do not have glasses or gloves on and the wind comes up and you are spraying the grasshoppers and it gets in your face, it can cause burns inside your nasal cavities and things like that, and it can damage your eyes, okay? And it can be reactive with water. So if you don't know this, before you go out and spray and the wind picks up and you run in the house and you douse a bunch of water in your face, you can make it worse and you can have long-lasting chemical burns, okay? You need to understand how to use these things and how to do it safely. So make sure you read the first aid, read the directions for use, and the precautionary statements. Precautionary statements will tell you the withdrawal period, which in cases of animals or children, it will say how long you need to keep animals and people out. If you are using it on vegetables, it will tell you how long you can use this before you can harvest. So if you are going to spray something like tomatoes, and you know you want to harvest your tomatoes in 5 days from now, that might be too short of a window for the chemical you're going to use, okay? So please, please read these labels. That all the information is on there. I know they're big, but please read them, okay? You can also easily Google this too. So if you go into the store and you're like, I don't really know, it's confusing, Google how to use 7 spray. How long can I wait to eat my tomatoes if I use 7? That's pretty easy to find because of the EPA. So that's pretty nice. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us what's in the jar?
That I didn't bring, but I'm assuming it looks like Eco Brand. It's some kind of granular bait, I would assume.
It kind of looks like wheat germ and.
Yeah, so if we go back, Eco Brand and most baits, it's wheat bran infused with carbide. So
Is that in the chickens?
if they eat it if they ate that whole jar, it could be. But if you have, how many birds do you have?
16.
16. How big is the area you let them?
3 acres.
3 acres. If you douse like an acre and a half in that stuff, no.
Can they still eat their eggs?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, and she asked, is it safe for chickens? Can you eat their eggs? If you do that, she has 16 chickens in roughly a 3-acre space. Yes, it is not going to kill her birds because she has a big enough space, enough animals. It's small enough, it's not going to affect them. You can eat their eggs. If you were looking at a space like in between these tables and you had 5 birds and you were going to cover this and that, absolutely not. You will wind up killing them. So that is something to think of. The other big thing a lot of people will ask is if the grasshoppers, say you got them, they're infected, you saw them limp into the chicken yard, the chicken ate the infected grasshopper, right? Is there going to be some issues? If you did it with a spray, possibly. A lot of the sprays have higher concentrations than the baits do, so just be aware of that you might see something. If you don't know, you can give activated charcoal to chickens. And that does work for getting any toxins out. So I would encourage you to you can get it in liquid form, and you can just use like a syringe that you get from Big R, and you can give it to them to encourage the toxins to come out. So if you are going to get some pesticides, I would encourage you to have activated charcoal on hand. Activated charcoal works for dogs and cats as well, if you don't know. So I would encourage you, if you're going to have chemicals, have some activated charcoal just in case someone eats something they shouldn't. All right, we spent a lot of time on beneficial, so I won't do a lot of this. But if you want to increase praying mantis, they like marigolds and roses. So do grasshoppers. But so do praying mantis. So those are good ones. Dragonflies are really aquatic-based species. So if you have like a little pond or a stream or a fountain or anything like that with some vegetation, that's a really good way to encourage them to come by. Wasps are a good one. Robber flies, those are, see the one on the top picture over there? That is a robber fly. So they are a parasitic fly that hatches on, they do like the movie Alien, where they stick their eggs on the inside of the grasshopper, the eggs pop out and they explode out of the grasshopper. So that's what they do. They like marigolds and sunflowers. So if you plant a lot of those, you're going to get a lot of robber flies, which will attract grasshoppers. So the other ones we already talked about. All right, blister beetle warning. So I actually got an email this morning from Montana and Wyoming telling me to tell you guys this tonight because they knew I was coming. Blister beetles follow grasshoppers because they go after grasshopper eggs. So they're beneficial, but the problem is what's in their name, blister. So they are really, really poisonous to livestock animals, and they're really bad for horses, and they're really, really common in hay fields. I was in a lot of your hay fields last year. I saw a lot of these. The problem is they will stay in the hay. Then when you go to make your windrows and you put it in the baler, they get crushed. One of these, one little beetle, which is the size of, I passed it around, who's got the beetle? Where's the beetle go? Over there? It's on the table. They're about the size of the stink beetle over there. They're pretty small. One of those kills a horse. Fully mature horse. One. Okay? The three-striped one is the most toxic. There are 3 species. The other 2 aren't as toxic. They will create mouth sores in cattle, sheep, goats, and horses, and then all other equines, so donkeys, mules, things like that. They don't affect swine, but the 3-striped blister beetle is the big one that is most toxic. So that is the 3-striped one in the corner. The other ones are these like blacker beetles, and on your QR sheet you have our fact sheet, which shows you all of the beetle types. And the biggest way, if they are in your hay fields because they're following the grasshoppers, there's not a lot of spraying you can really do for these guys. You don't really want to kill them. What you want to do is, if you have your windrows, just let them dry a little bit and shake the hay with like an extra rake or something before you take the baler by, because they'll fly out of the windrows. So just go through it a little extra to get the beetles to move out, because they can fly and they'll leave. So you just really don't want to dry them out and crush them. Yeah.
Do they harm dogs or cats?
Most of the dogs and cats don't eat them because they also give off a bad aroma. So generally they stay away, but if they do, they can get mouth sores. So if your animal comes in and has... No, they won't kill dogs and cats, but if you see them coming in from a field or something, there's a lot of mouth sores, or they start to develop it, they probably had run in with a blister.
Do you know of another insect that looks somewhat like the 3-striped blister beetle?
A potato beetle looks a lot like that, but potato beetles are rounder in their body. They're more like a melon, if you think of a shape. These guys are a lot more pinstriped. So it can be really hard to identify beetles. I encourage you, if you are not very familiar with insects, there's a pretty good app. iNaturalist is a good one, and you can download it as an app. You can take pictures in real time, and it will ID the insect for you. The other one is called Picture This. So those are 2 really good apps, and they're really easy to use. They're pretty user-friendly, and they're pretty good. And they do iNaturalist. We're actually working with putting into the curriculum of the university. So iNaturalist, yeah, and it's
Naturalist.
Naturalist. So it's I, like the letter I, Naturalist, and the other one is Picture This. So those are the 2 apps I would encourage you to check out if you have a tough time with identification. All right, so I know I throw a lot at you, but that's some really good information. I'm going to make sure. If you're curious about the new species they found last month, I did also list that on your QR sheet. You can read all about it, about the 16 new species that have entered. Does anyone have questions about locusts? Because I know that's often a question. I'm saying heads, nods, yeah? Okay.
We're gonna get them?
We are not. So if you don't know, we haven't had locusts in the United States since the early 1900s, which is nice. The rest of the world is plagued by locusts. The United States, we went to war with them and we won. We have kept them out. However, they are in Mexico, and they have been approaching the border as of last spring. And Texas A&M is the only one that has a locust research center. They have been very closely monitoring the borders and working a lot with the TSA agents and people who stop folks that are bringing plants and food in, because locusts will hitch a ride and come on through. So there is concern that they could come back into the United States in this year or the next couple years. If you don't know, that we were plagued by it, we're from They have maps and documentaries where from Texas to Colorado, they blocked out the sun when they took flight.
Oh my.
Yes. So locusts are really bad. And all locusts are grasshoppers, but not every grasshopper can become a locust. So the way that works is grasshoppers are normally solitary individuals outside of mating purposes. They're kind of just their own individual. They do their thing. They live their life. They die. When they become a locust, what happens is they genetically change. So they release a pheromone, and a lot like how when you see bees swarm and they get together and they kind of congregate and they get really loud, they will do the same thing. So they release a pheromone, they find others that have that same pheromone, the same gene, they all get very excited and they change. They change color, they get a lot bigger, their wings extend, their legs get longer, and their mouths get bigger. Okay? And so it's like, it's called a jackal, Mr. Jackal, Mr. Hyde, is what the researchers call it, because it's a complete reversal from the original insect. And then it cannot go back. So once it is a locust, it stays a locust. Right now, there are only 11 identified grasshopper species in the United States that have the potential to turn into locusts. But as you saw with the numbers, 11 is still a lot, because all it takes is one, right? And it would only take one of the locusts from Mexico to come and infect our populations and start a whole nother wave. And like I said, you can see where they decimated acres and acres of land, where they built like 8-foot fences, and they were standing guard with flamethrowers trying to protect the cattle, and they were blocking out people's windows, and it's crazy if you go and look it up. You should see the destruction they did to Colorado Springs, and they did throw grenades at them, and that's how they got rid of them. So,
wow.
Yeah, it is wild. Yeah. It's wild. The National Guard did a very good job on insect eradication. So, way to go them. Yes, ma'am.
What recommendations do you have for greenhouse to keep grasshoppers out?
Her question was, how do you keep grasshoppers out of greenhouses? It's really tough because just like anything else, they're going to find a way in. So, like any crack, any doorway, any amount of space, when they're small, they're going to find a way in. If you can keep them out past those main hatching seasons, so if you can hold them off till early June, you're probably not going to get any in there. But that's going to be the tough part, is you're going to have to fight to keep them out. I would do like double doors. I would do maybe some plastic, some screen, things that they're going to have to chew through. Make it where they have to work. So if they really have to spend a lot of time there, they're probably not going to, because they have to eat every day. So if you make it really difficult for them on the entrance points, they're going to move somewhere else in your yard, or they'll move to your neighbors. So.
Is any of those, like the EcoGrand I use, is that dangerous for my lizards? I'm in Rockville. I got a ton of lizards, and they were getting really big, so I'm hoping they're still there.
Yeah. She asked, is EcoGrand dangerous for lizards? It can be in copious amounts. So I would say be mindful of how much you're using. With EcoGrand, you don't have to use a lot of it. It is pretty minimal. I don't remember the recommendation usage, but I know it's really small. So if you stay at the use threshold or lower, you should be fine. If you start, I would also watch your population. So if you're used to seeing a lot of them, and then you went and did that, and all of a sudden you see a lot less, I would say wait, let that area recover, and try really hard not to rebait, just because you probably did knock them back a little bit.
According to you, I probably didn't do it at the best, most efficient time. You are very knowledgeable. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
The grasshopper I had mostly had a bright yellow face and partly, is that a two-stripe?
Was the whole body yellow or just the face?
A whole lot of it was yellow.
What color were the wings?
You know, that I don't know.
Okay. Did it make noise when it flew? Was it like a crack?
I didn't look for any of that, but you know how they stare at you.
Yeah.
Their faces. Yeah.
I do. Without more information, I don't know. But if you see them again this year, please either capture some or send me pictures.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
We were like 20 pumpkin plants last year. They didn't touch it. Is that something that they don't like, pumpkin plants? Does anyone else have that experience?
Do you know what species it was?
Pumpkins?
Yeah.
We had the sugar pumpkins. There were different types.
Sugar. Okay. So, but it was mostly sugar plum.
Pumpkins,
Pumpkins?
and then also the decorative gourds.
Okay, and decorative gourds.
They didn't touch them.
It might have been that the spines and the way the leaf structure is not their favorite. Again, they will, in high enough numbers, they would have eat it, but it means that they either found something else they really liked on your property, or your threshold numbers just weren't high enough to push them to where they were eating every single living thing. Yeah. Right.
How far away from what you're trying to protect would you want to put something that
How big is your garden space that you're trying to protect?
Thank you very much.
Okay. I would go probably like 4 or 5 feet away from that, because you don't want to go too far where they won't go to it, but you don't want to be so close to it that like they're just going to come into your garden anyway. But yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, especially, if you can intermingle the hot peppers with your flowers, absolutely, because they really don't like it. And like I said, the hotter the species you can get, the better, and that will really deter them. Also, most other insects don't like heat. They don't like the caffeine in it, so that's really beneficial. If you can plant more things in the nightshade family, so things like eggplants, potatoes, things like that, it does kill them off as well as they eat the vegetation. They can eat it. It is a longer killing process, but just know that if you do have those plants, or maybe you want to buy some extras to use as the sacrifices, as like the protectors, right? You can get things like that and kind of just know those are your sacrifice plants. You specifically bought them for that reason, but it's going to stop the grasshoppers at that point because it's going to bother them in a digestive manner. So just be aware of that you could use those as a benefit too. Yes, sir?
If capsaicin they don't like, why can't you make a spray of capsaicin and spray on your plants?
You absolutely can, and there are quite a few like online recipes of doing like hot pepper sprays that you can make at home. So just try to say, a lot of them ask you to put garlic oil in it, and just remember, if you use the garlic, that's an attractant. So if you mix the two, they can smell the garlic, so you're kind of asking them to come wherever you're putting that spray. So stay away from the recipes that ask for garlic, but otherwise you can just find them on the internet and make your own hot pepper spray, and yeah, you can absolutely do that. And you don't have to dilute it as hard as what they say online, so you can up the amount of peppers and things like that you use to create the heat in the spray if you're going for the grasshoppers. Yes, ma'am.
I'm also my garden probably in the fall after. When she
So did you see mating happening where the mulch is? All over. So she was asking, she had the garden bed, there's a lot of mulch there, and she saw mating like everywhere. Should she take the mulch off? You can. It's too late to have that be an impact now. That would have been a fall management item to kind of, and especially like the cold freezes we were getting, that would have been a really good tool to do then. At this point of the game, it's not really going to change your numbers. The baits. Okay. Because you're going to have to wait till they're hatching anyway. The mulch really isn't going to have an impact one way or the other. So if you want to do that, if you find a hatching site and it's easier for you, and you don't want to necessarily contaminate it after they're gone, you can remove it and then put it back. But it's kind of dependent on how much you're seeing the grasshoppers. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. It's called if you look up like Rocky Mountain Locust documentary, it comes up. I can't remember the full name of the docuseries, it's a full documentary. It does come up. It's not like on the normal streaming services. You can just get it on YouTube or something like that. But it's pretty interesting to watch. So.
Rocky Mountain Locust?
Yeah, Rocky Mountain Locust documentary. Yeah, you could. You still kind of do want to wait until they're hatched because you can pop the eggs with heat, but they're pretty fire resistant too, and when they're still eggs. So when they start hatching, but yeah, a lot of people did in Pueblo. I can tell you, went out with propane burners and just went and burned the crap out of them, and it was pretty effective. So if you can do it when they're young and they can't really fly, absolutely. They are very susceptible to extreme heat at that point. When they're adults, and a lot of people ask, if we have like a wildfire run through, will that really kill them off? No. They will find a place to hide, unfortunately. So, no, it doesn't. And actually, at the National Grasshopper meeting, they had a video because they were, when all those big fires were happening in Wyoming last year, the Chalnova, and they didn't know why the fires kept spreading. It was grasshoppers. They were on fire, and they were flying for miles on fire and starting grass fires. And they had a video, and it was the wildest thing I ever saw. So they're like, if you have grasshoppers and they're on fire, they will absolutely start more wildfires. I'm like, that's crazy. So just be aware of that. They do spread fires. Yes.